Good afternoon, everybody. Aaron here with A.V.Astronomy. Really excited about today's video. Going to be talking about the Canon G7X Mark II. I just got this camera secondhand off eBay recently in an effort to get something that's better for vlogging, but also that would have the potential to be a grab-and-go camera for astrophotography and nightscape photography. So that's what we're going to be talking about today here on A.V.Astronomy. The Canon G7X Mark II. Alright, so let's get a little more familiar with the mechanics of this camera. So we'll start with the top. Your power button is here. Your shutter release is here, and this is of course your zoom in, zoom out. Most people who are familiar with point and shoots, it should feel pretty much right at home. This, if you're only accustomed to using a point and shoot camera, this is going to seem kind of new. But this is where some of the highlights of this camera are, the manual control that you have. We'll start with this first dial here. Now, some of these you'll be familiar with, like program mode. You've probably seen that on a traditional point and shoot camera. But you also have a shutter priority mode, aperture priority mode, and manual mode, as well as a custom mode. Now, with program mode, the camera decides what is the best overall shutter speed and aperture for your particular shooting situation. For instance, if you were shooting on a sunny day, it would automatically determine, based on the brightness and the background and foreground of your picture, what the best combination shutter speed and aperture will be to get a proper exposure. However, this doesn't take into account if you're doing something that involves action. So if you were imaging something, photographing something that involved action, you would want to use shutter priority, because that will give you the ability to control how fast the shutter speed is. This gives you this option, like for instance here, to freeze frame action and get a nice still image of something that has a lot of action in it. And on the same token, it also gives the ability to slow and get that nice slow blurred effect, like with flowing water or clouds across the sky. This mode here, aperture priority, gives you the other aspect of image control. Aperture priority is what controls your depth of field. Okay, depth of field is important because that shows how much of your foreground and background will be in focus at the same time. The more shallow the depth of field you have, the more your foreground or your main image subject will pop from the background. The deeper your depth of field, the better for imaging things such as landscapes or wide-angle shots, because you want everything to be in focus. Aperture priority gives you that control while not having to worry about what shutter speed to use, and same for shutter priority. You get to control how action will appear in the photo without having to worry about what aperture to use. But once you get an idea of those settings in different lighting situations, and you want to have more control over your image and the result, full manual is where it's at. And this gives you the ability to control both your aperture and shutter speed. And the custom setting that they have here, you can actually program in here some pre-programmed shutter speed and aperture settings for your shooting situation. Now, another really cool aspect about the top dial is it has this exposure compensation wheel. And what this does, this is really cool, guys, because you can bump this up to a +1 all the way up to a +3 and down to a -3. And this is referring to the stop of exposure. So each one represents a full stop above what's considered a neutral exposure and a full stop below. To make more sense of that, what that means is if you have a picture where you want things to appear just a little bit darker than what the camera would normally expose it for, this is what it would look like. On the other hand, if you wanted something that you wanted it to appear a little bit brighter and lighter than what the camera would normally expose for, if you put it on, say, +1, one full stop, this is what it would look like. So it's a really nice manual feature that gives you just that much more control. And I got to tell you, my first impressions of this camera overall, I'm just really impressed with what the capabilities of this camera are for being such a small form factor. Let's look at the menu here. So let's go back to the first menu. So this, to me, if you have a Canon DSLR, this is going to look real familiar. Okay, this is going to look very familiar to what you've seen on a lot of the Canon EOS digital SLRs. You have the ability to change the image quality. Okay, you can go standard all the way up to the highest JPEG, and you can shoot in RAW on this, believe it or not, which is awesome. Especially when you're doing astrophotography, you want to be able to have that capability. We'll leave it on JPEG for now, but you can change the aspect ratio, exposure simulation, reverse display, image review time. These are all standard, but nice features to have. There's some things on here such as Face ID, which is pretty incredible. There's a Wi-Fi setting. You can customize the movie setting. You can change your, look at this, ISO, white balance, picture style, RAW plus JPEG, auto exposure lock, autofocus lock, neutral density filter. A neutral density filter helps kind of reduce the dynamic range of an image so that detail can be captured just as much in a bright part of the scene as it can in the dark part of the scene. It's a really nice feature to have. It's just really impressed with all of the features on here. Self-timer, autofocus method, whether if it uses just a single person, like this for instance, or a single point of interest in the image, or if you're doing like a family shot and you want to be able to capture everyone in focus, you can change how it chooses the focus. The touch shutter, I mean, the list goes on here. Digital teleconverter, so this has the ability to do digital zoom, but as you know, digital zoom does take away a little bit of image quality the more you use it. So, but natively, this camera is capable of imaging at, it has on here 8.8 to 36.8 millimeter, but that is the DSLR equivalent of a 24 to 105 millimeter lens. So awesome range to have. I mean, that's anything from wide angle to portrait range to standard zoom. So excellent range lens to have. Not to mention the aperture range on this is 1.8 to 2.8. So you can, at its widest angle, you can get as low as 1.8, which is awesome for a point and shoot. And it does fantastic in low light, which is one of the reasons why I got this. I do a lot of vlogging indoors. You know, I don't really have a professional studio room to do my vlogging. So having a camera that has the ability to function well in low lighting situations is awesome. So I really do like that about it. But even at the 105, you can get as wide, 105 millimeter focal length, you can be as wide open as 2.8. And remember, with aperture, the smaller the number, the wider the eye, the better its ability to take in light. All right, let's go back to the menu here. There's the digital zoom I was mentioning, your autofocus options, okay? And it goes on, autofocus assist beam, manual focus point zoom, autofocus, manual focus, that feature is off. Image stabilization settings, it's on continuous, so it's constantly adjusting to the motion and stabilizes your image to reduce any shaking that would be detected otherwise without that feature. Bracketing, ISO speed. Now if you're familiar with SLRs, this will be something you're familiar with, but if you're not and you've just been using point and shoots, chances are you haven't had to use or make adjustments in ISO. And ISO in control, it's essentially a gain setting on a camera. The higher the gain setting, the brighter the images are going to be. It means quicker exposure times. At the trade-off though, at some kind of grainy, noisy, it's not so much you get more noise in the image. In fact, you get less noise, believe it or not, the higher ISO you go, but you do get more of a grainy artifacts in the image. But that can be removed pretty well by just stacking your images. So in regards to astrophotography, that's a great feature to have. So you can bump up the ISO, get those exposure times down, stack your images, and still come out with a nice image. And I'm going to give an example of that later on here and show you guys what this camera is capable of when it comes to wide-angle astrophotography or nightscape imaging. I thought it was pretty cool that you can actually do a custom white balance on here. If you have a gray card, you can shoot a gray card in your current lighting situation and then program that as your white balance shot, as the white balance shot. And in doing so, it will customize the white balance to your particular lighting situation. So it's really the best way to get the most accurate color. But the auto white balance does a pretty darn good job of detecting that. But if you want that extra control, you have that with the custom white balance. Picture style, you can change picture style, and what that does essentially is it pre-programs how the camera is going to saturate the image or sharpen the image, that sort of thing, depending on what picture style you choose. High ISO speed noise reduction, I've not seen that before. That's pretty awesome. That essentially helps reduce the noise after you take a shot with high ISO, which is also a nice feature as well. Self-timer always comes in handy. And then you have different settings for your movie recording, which I will be using the highest setting here when I am filming. Now I'm currently filming on my Canon 77D. I'm actually using my modded Canon for this portion of the video, but I will be showing some footage from the Canon G7 Mark II as well. There is a wind filter on here, which is awesome. And this particular one came with a little windscreen here as well, which I thought was pretty awesome. And that's the basic overview there on the menu. You do have macro, normal, manual focus options you can access right here on the dial. You can change your shooting speed. If you're going to be doing a burst of shots, maybe something high action, you could use that. But for most practical purposes, you probably leave it in shoot single image mode. And then here's your options with flash. This camera is Wi-Fi capable, so you can upload your images to your computer via the Wi-Fi network, having it connected to it. You can also control, look over here, you have control over the metering, how it meters your scene, what part of the scene you want it to actually meter to determine the best lighting situation for your camera. And the fit and finish of this camera is very, very nice. It's got a nice grip, very ergonomic, very easy to hold. It doesn't feel like it would slip out of your hand very easily. The grip is nice. Can be mounted on any tripod. I have the little Joby Gorilla Pod that I use that I have mounted on here currently. Oh, and another really cool feature is this screen flip. So when you're taking a video, you can actually, see what's going on, make sure you're framing up everything nicely. So I do like that screen flip capability on that as well. Well guys, let's take this thing outside and let's do some nightscape photography. It's fairly cloudy, but I still feel like I could get some decent looking stuff, even with some clouds here and there passing through. And I'll try to piggyback it, get it piggybacked on my EQ6R Pro mount. All right guys, so I have fashioned a piggyback bracket so I can test out this Canon G7X Mark II on my EQ6R Pro mount. So I'm going to connect this inside here, like so, just get it good and tight, and then screw this on here. Okay, so I had to make a little adjustment here because this camera was just not snugging up to this mount here. So I've got a little piece of foam here. I'm going to test this out and see if I can get this to snug up. That's perfect right there. There we go, nice and snug, ready to go. So there it is guys, mounted on the piggyback bracket. Let's get this thing outside and start taking some pictures. Okay, all right guys, I'm trying to make a mad dash here to get set up. I think I've got maybe an hour of light. So I've got the guide scope here set up. What I'm gonna do is try and just do a real quick, snappy polar alignment, okay? That way I don't have to worry about guiding. But even so, since I'm shooting at 24mm focal length, really shouldn't have too many issues with stars trailing anyway, but I still want this to be as accurate as of a polar alignment as I can get it. So that's what I'm working on right now. All right guys, after struggling, trying to fight through these clouds here, I was able to polar align. So I'm going to carefully remove this guide scope. And set up my piggyback mounted Canon G7X Mark II and start taking some subframes here. The clouds should hopefully hold off for at least another 30 minutes. So here's hoping I can get some at least 20 or so frames to make a decent image. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started and I'll show you guys what I wind up with.